Okay, excellent. Then I think we can start. So welcome today for this nice IEEE workshop on how to write a good protocol. My name is Matthias Magdowski. I'm Chief Officer of Protocol Writing at this university. And with me in the room, there are 7 people now. There are 4 people already connected online. And so we have roughly 90 minutes to discuss about how to write a good protocol. To be honest, for our German students, it's very important because they do lots of laboratory internships in their bachelor study. Maybe you have done in your in the universities in your home country as well. For you, probably the motivation is more to what is important if you write a master thesis, if you write a research paper, something like this. And I mean, at the end, this is very similar to writing a protocol. So to start with, I have some live polls. So it would be nice if you could go to this website. And I think, or maybe I will switch over to the site, and maybe I can also have a QR code there. So there it is. And I don't know if I've started the question yet, but anyhow, you can scan the code, and then I will wait until no cell phones are pointing at me anymore, which is the case now. And I think then I will start this question. Hello, hello. Come in. And the question is, no, this is the wrong question, right? This does not make too much sense. Stop. I want to have this question here. How many? So this should be the right question now. I hope it will be the same QR code. So how many laboratory protocols have you written so far in your life? And the answer options are none, 1, 2, about 5, about 10 or more. And you can, in the back, you can just shout something into the room? None. None, okay. Yeah, I think there are 20 seconds left to cast your votes. I've just said that for our German, hello, for our German students, now we have more than 10 people in the room. For our German students, it's quite important writing such protocols because they do it a lot because they have very many laboratory internships in their study program. Okay, so now we should hopefully see a result. And so the light blue is the actual result. I think the dark blue is the actual result. The light blue is the one from a previous workshop. Yeah, so we have most of the people say none, some maybe 1 or 2. And I guess this would be 1 person today, 1 out of 7, it says more than 10. Who is this? Yeah, okay, I think, I mean, I would say I have maybe written, I don't know, 100 or so. Still, I would say it's quite interesting to think and to talk about the subject. Okay, so I think you're the perfect audience then. So the structure is as follows, that I've already given some motivation, I will maybe give some more motivation. Then we will take a look on actually how to write a good protocol. And I've tried to separate this a little bit into content and style. And the content really more or less applies to these standard laboratory protocols that students would need to write in our courses. The style, of course, also applies to research papers, to theses, to reports, technical reports, and so on. Then this is, yeah, maybe the most interesting part, I would say, is we will take a look at some examples, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Especially try to take a look at some bad examples and then discuss probably how we can improve them. And then there will be at least 1 or 2 further workshops in this series that are somehow dedicated to LaTeX. And so we will take a quick look on some examples, how to, and you should be able to understand these examples without knowing too much about LaTeX, but just to give you the idea how to draw diagrams there with this PGF package, and how to do circuit schematics or wiring schematics with this CircuiTikZ package. And of course, at the end, there will be a summary. So let's start with a quick motivation. I've already said our students need to write laboratory protocols for the internships. Later you write project reports, thesis, and if you work somewhere as an engineer, as a development engineer in a company, very probably you also need to write protocols about the measurements experience that you do there in your working life. And the main purpose of such a protocol is always that another person that was not present there at the day of the experiment should be able to follow and to understand what you have done by reading the protocol. That's the main purpose, that's the main idea. So there will usually be a description of the experimental procedure, then what you have measured, what you have observed, and what knowledge can you get out of this? What is the interpretation of this? What is the discussion of the results? Okay, so then we can already come to the question how to write a good protocol. And as said, I've split this up a little bit into content and style. So now the question is a little bit, you can just raise your arm. Do you think that in your study program you need to write a classical laboratory internship protocol? And you probably as well, right? For the engineering science. Okay, so then I think then it makes sense that we speak a little bit about this. So usually there is a very generic structure. There will be a cover page. There is a template that is more or less given. Then you have, like in a thesis, you have some theoretical fundamentals, what formulas one needs to know to understand your experiment, your outcomes. There might be something that you need to prepare in advance and that needs to be described. Then, of course, there is the experimental procedure with all the details. And there's a question.
Do we have access to the contents and the slides that you use?
Yeah, I've not used my usual housekeeping slides, but you can have the presentation. If you Google for them now, they should be available somewhere. Maybe not the very actual version, I will share it later, but I will share the slides later. You don't need to photograph the slides. I will share the slides later, and if the recording works, there will be also a recording. But feel free to ask questions in between, right? And stop me at any time. I know that I speak very fast and I don't do that much pauses, but stop me at any time if you have a question in between. Okay, then in the experimental description, in the theoretical fundamentals, you will use formulas and theories that have been developed before, for sure. So you will cite these sources in the list of references, in the literature list, and maybe you have to give a declaration of authorship that needs to be signed, and maybe there is some appendix with your original handwritten notes that you have taken in the day of the experiment that maybe also needs to be signed by your supervisor to make sure that you have not, let's say, altered the data or changed the data later on to make it better fit to the theory, right? Because this is not the way how it's done. Okay, so on the cover page, as said, there's a template with all the necessary content, and just stick to the template, fill it in completely, then there will be no questions back and forth. What was your group number? When was the day of your experiment? And so on. Okay, so for this theoretical fundamentals, it should be, let's say, as short as possible, as long as necessary. Give the sources for the equations that you need, and usually the length should be somewhere like one to 3 pages maybe. It should, as said, not to be too general, not too broad. It should also, you also don't need to have too detailed derivations of formulas, and maybe some theoretical background is already given in the instructions for the experiment, and of course you don't need to copy from the instructions. And so for the master program, I always did a laboratory internship or laboratory experiments in our reverberation chamber with students, and then in the protocol, students would always write what the reverberation chamber is and how it works. And I always told them, I know, yeah, you don't need to explain it to me. If you want to write it down for your own understanding, that's probably okay, but you don't need to write it down for me. And the same is don't copy from the instructions. Okay, then for the preparation, yeah, the idea is if you need to prepare something in advance, the idea behind is that you should, before coming to the lab, you should know what you should do. Yeah, right. You should not come to the lab and then read the instruction. Oh, what are we going to do? And what does this mean? And what is this theory? And so on. So prepare in advance. The don't be creative thing means a little bit, yeah, if it should not be too complicated. If it's really getting complicated, then you're doing something wrong. That's the idea there. So just check the script, maybe check the textbook, check the exercise notes. The solution should be somewhere there. So then for the experiment itself, there is maybe some sub-categorization like part A, part B, part C. Just stick to this, stick to this structure. Then if you describe your results later on, use some, we will see this in the examples maybe, use some introductory sentences. What is this section about? What are you going to describe in the next section? Of course, if you do measurements, if you use physical quantities, use the units correctly. Then equations, figures, tables are usually numbered. Why it's useful and meaningful to number equations, figures, tables? Why it's, I mean, I've seen a PhD thesis at our faculty once where the equation, there was just one and this was not numbered, but usually you have a bit more than one equation in your protocol thesis report whatsoever. Why it's useful to number them? To reference them, to later say, okay, if we now take equation 2, insert it into equation 4, we get the next equation. Right? And the same is with figures and tables. And so for equations, you can still say, if we take the previous equation and so on, and then we come up with the next equation. And so for equations, it usually does not, sometimes it's seen that people say, yeah, and now we derive equation 5, and then the next equation is equation 5. And this not really makes sense. This referencing with numbers only makes sense if it's an equation that is not the previous and not the next. That was 2 pages before or 2 pages ahead, because equations will always be in the very same order as in your text. They will not float around. But figures and tables, at least in good document typesetting, are so-called floating objects. So you can never say in the following table, in the previous figure or something like this, because it does not necessarily at this position of the text needs to be the previous or following figure, because tables and figures can float around. I never have a paper here to demonstrate this, so I always need to have. So imagine, I will enlarge my camera view. So imagine that this is a page of your report, yeah, and you have that much text. And now you would need to have a figure, and the figure does not fit onto the page anymore. And so now what a good document typesetting system like LaTeX will do, it will not leave white space here and just put the figure to the next page. It will pull the text from the next page to here and put the figure to the next page. So yeah, figures are floating objects. They can float a little bit around in your report to avoid white space. And that's why, as said, you can usually not say the next figure, the following figure, the previous figure, the previous table, and so on, because they are floating. You always have to say in figure 1, in figure 2, and so on. And of course, you should remain accurate. And for the discussion of the results, the most interesting thing is, of course, not, okay, you have used the theory, like you have measured, I don't know, the current voltage characteristic of a resistor, and according to Ohm's law, this should be a straight line. And the theory says it's a straight line, your measurement says it's a straight line, and you say, okay, measurement fits to the theory. But usually there will be some discrepancies, there will be some deviations, there will be something that is not as expected. And then it's, of course, it's interesting, hello, it's interesting to discuss why do we have these deviations, why it's not fitting to what you expected before, what could be difficulties or uncertainties in the measurement or in the setup, how could the accuracy of the measurement be improved, something like this. What could be possible sources of errors and stuff. Okay, so then for the list of references, each reference that you cite should always have an author, and the author could also be an institution, like if it's an international standard, then it could be the ISO or the IEC or whatsoever. And if you cite, we can come back to this question in a minute. If you cite, let's say, a Wikipedia article, then Wikipedia articles have lots of authors, so of course it does not make sense to list all these authors, then the author would just be the Wikipedia, right? And there's a question.
Is the format of the literature references important, or is it just important that all the important information are there?
Depends a little bit on the supervisor and whoever judges and reviews the protocol. For German protocols, it's very simple because, as for everything, we have a standard. We have a DIN standard, Deutsches Institut für Normen, German Institute for Standardization. So there's a DIN standard for literature references. The problem with the standard is, of course, that it's that it has been, as far as I know, last updated in the 1980s or 1990s. So it's not very up to date in terms of electronic sources and web sources and online sources, but still there is a standard. And for English documents in the engineering sciences, and especially in the electrical engineering science, I would always use this IEEE style, because this is like the international professional organization of electronic engineers, and they publish lots of publications. And the IEEE has more than 500,000 members worldwide, and so they have a citation style that they use for all their journals, magazines, conference proceedings, publications, and so on. And I would just stick to the style. And so, if the supervisor of your lab comes up with this, or if of your thesis comes up with a strange format, as a German student, I would always say, I will just do it according to the DIN standard. And if you have other ideas, just convince me why I should use your other strange ideas and not just the DIN standard. And for English papers, I would just stick to the IEEE template with the same idea. Yeah? So why invent something else than what is very much internationally agreed? And the more important thing maybe is that it's somehow that all the references that you cite in your list of references, that they all have the same format. And it should not happen that sometimes you start with the first name and you start with the family name, and then the first name is abbreviated and it's the full first name and so on. Yeah? And it's not that sometimes the title should be in italics and then the next type it's in boldface letters, and this would be really strange. So decide for some format, stick to this format. Does this answer the question?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so each source should have an author. Each source should have a title. Each source should have a way how to access this source. So usually for all the modern sources, it will be something like a URL or some link, right? Some unified resource locator, or a DOI, a digital object identifier, like the ones that we have here. And for older books, it's sometimes that there is only a publisher. Because let's say 100 years ago, if you would cite a book, you would at least give the publisher and the address of the publisher, and then you could like write a letter to the publisher and say, I want to have this book, send me this book. Yeah? So author, title, way to access the source, and the date or a year. From which year is this reference? So that people who would read your report, protocol, thesis, whatever, know, okay, is it an actual source, is it an old source, from which time is the source? And as said, for English paper, I would just stick to the IEEE guideline. And so for this Dean thing, on our website, on the website of our chair, we also have some guidance. Let me click on this, then my browser should once again open up. And so we are directly on this page, and there's also an English template. But I would, as you can see, it's from 2021. So I think if you would just look at Overleaf, there is the more up-to-date template that we have. Okay, and in the appendix, as said, maybe some handwritten notes, originally scanned measurement data documents, and then if you scan them, or nowadays you would rather just take your cell phone, do a photograph of them, make sure that contrast brightness is okay. If the signature is important, then the signature should of course be visible and so on. Okay, and looking at the style, a protocol is like a small degree thesis. So at the end, of course, we can only also just use this guidance on the preparation of degree thesis. This is this website that I've just shown here. And you would also find this on Overleaf. So I will just quickly type this into my browser here. So if you go into the Overleaf gallery and, for example, search for OVGU, then there will be some templates that you find there for LaTeX. So this is the German version, this is the slides version, and this is the English version. This is this guidance on the preparation of degree thesis. And I think this should be updated 8 months ago, exactly. Yeah, and you could open it up here as a template. You could show the source code, you can show the PDF, and I can maybe open up the PDF quickly. Yeah, and then you can see that this is a document that gives some guidance on how to write thesis, but at the same time it's formatted in a way how a thesis should look like. So there's an abstract, there's maybe the task sheet, there's some declaration, there's a table of contents with some introduction and a summary and bibliography and so on and so on. Yeah, and so if you would open this up here as a template, you could also then change it, insert your content there. In the Overleaf editor, which makes it very, very easy to use because you don't need to install any software on your computer. And since last year, our university also has a full-featured professional Overleaf license for every student. So, which usually, I don't know, costs 150 euros per year or so. You get this for free because you're a student at our university. Isn't this nice? Okay, so then if you plot diagrams in your report, in your thesis, what you might do, then diagrams should of course have clear axis labels, readable numbers. If there's more than one line, there should be a legend, and they should also have a meaningful caption. In the presentation here, of course, it does not make too much sense to number the figure, because in the presentation, yeah, but and usually LaTeX would not number figures in a presentation, but here I've on purpose added a number. Okay, the same is for tables. They should also have a clear labeling, a clear statement of which quantities are measured there. So I would always do it in the way that Yeah, what is the physical meaning of this quantity? What is the symbol? And what is the unit? This should be clear. And then, yeah, in English international documents, it's more common to have the dot as the decimal separator. Probably also very common for all of you guys, right? For us in Germany, it's more the comma. It depends, but okay. So then, as we've discussed, yeah, these tables and figures are floating objects. Therefore, they also need to have a description that somehow describes them, so they need to have a caption. And from my point of view, it's always a good idea, even if this makes them quite long, to have these table captions and figure captions self-contained, let's say, and self-explanatory. Because if you read a book, a technical book, or if you read a paper, and if you don't have much time, what do? You skip through the pages and you look at the figures and you try to get a clue what is written inside this paper or book by just looking at the figures. And then of course it makes sense if the figures are somehow understandable by itself without having to read too much of the paper. Yeah, and this means give them not too long, but quite well understandable captions. Don't say something like a diagram of the measured data, because everyone will see that's a diagram and it's probably made out of measured data or maybe out of simulated data. This is a nonsense caption. Yeah? But give figures a meaningful caption. What is displayed there in this figure and which information can one get out of this? So, okay, then we have another good question. Why are table captions usually placed above the table and why are figure captions usually placed below the figure? Anyone an idea for this?
That way the table doesn't look way too cluttered and you get a proper detail before going to the data on the table.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, tables can be somehow very confusing. That's why it's maybe, yeah, so a figure says more than 1,000 words. So I've never thought of this explanation, but this is also, I think, a quite good explanation. Okay, the figure can describe itself and then I read the caption. And for the table, I definitely need the caption before understanding. No, the real reason is that tables can sometimes be longer, can sometimes go over 1 or 2 pages, or let's say more than 1 page. And then, of course, it does not make sense if you have table, 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 and then comes the caption that explains the table. That's why table captions are usually above the table. Yeah? And then you can reference them in the text, as we've discussed, and you should not say in the following figure and the previous figure. And what is really bad is to use JPEG compressed raster graphics for diagrams. We will see this later in the examples. And this, unfortunately, happens quite often. Yeah? And if you use diagrams, figures from web pages, then often they are saved in this format and you cannot do much against this. But if you create your own figures, then make sure to create them in a high quality format. And this is a vector format, which we will see later. Okay, so then some further hints for writing. If you use abbreviations, I would always try to avoid abbreviations because they are always super confusing. Yeah, of course, you can use, let's say, AC and DC, everyone knows, but and then people use the same abbreviation in different contexts for different meanings. This can be really, really confusing. So maybe sometimes it's nice if you say, okay, this was shown already in figure 1, but figure 1 was 10 pages ahead. Then you not just say this was shown in figure 1, but this was shown in figure 1 on page 2, because then it's much easier to find this figure. Yeah, and in LaTeX, it's also, or in a good document typesetting system, it's very easy to include such references and cross-references. Then this is, if you take care of such details, then people will know that you really take care about your document and about your scientific writing. And so if you have, let's say, figure 1 and you have figure at the end of the line and the one at the beginning of the next line, this looks a bit ugly because figure, and then the 1 is so single on the next line. So what you can do is you can put a non-breaking space between figure and the number, or between page and the number, and table and the number, so that the word figure and the number will not be split across 2 lines. And the same is if you have numbers in units. Yeah? It looks super ugly if you have, let's say, 100 and then the megahertz is on the next line. So the number and the unit should stick together. Make sure when to use a hyphen, make sure when to use a dash. Nowadays, you need to be a bit careful about this, because these dashes and en dashes and em dashes are said to be a sign of AI-generated text, because the AI would only really take care when to use a hyphen, when to use a dash. So probably many of the documents that I have written in my past would now be assumed to be AI-generated because I cared. But okay. So then in technical documents, we don't put references into footnotes like people in the humanities sometimes maybe do. And then if you write circuit schematics, there's an agreed list of electronic symbols. I maybe can also click on this link, and then this Wikipedia page should show up. And so there are different international norms and standards how circuit symbols look like, and so just stick to this list, don't invent your own symbols. Sometimes it's necessary to invent your own symbols. Oh, this looks like a smiley. But yeah, just stick to what people have used before and what is, let's say, the agreed standard. What is also important, at least in German and in English documents, is to avoid these planks and clamps. So there's usually no space before a comma, but there should always be a space behind the comma. So this is wrong. This is such a clamp where something is clamped together. Yeah? Or before some opening parenthesis, there should also be a space. Or after the dot, there should be a space. Or after the period. And the opposite of a clamp is a plank, and so this is also wrong, this space here, or this space is wrong. So try to make sure to avoid this. There should never be a space before the comma and dot, but always be a space behind the comma and dot. And there's a German page where this is explained a bit. Okay, so then mathematical formulas. I think this is here the Fourier transform as an example. So yeah, if you do the mask typesetting, a good mask typesetting tool, not so much can go wrong. Usually, so what we can see here, maybe a bit to explain this, usually variables with some arbitrary meaning are slanted. Then if you have, let's say, constants or something that has a special meaning, so this is a constant, this is not some arbitrary e, it's Euler's number. And that's why this is not a slanted e, it's an upright e. The same is here, this is not some arbitrary d, this is a differential operator. So this is an upright d, because it's not some, So then think about a little bit, like spacing. Usually your math typesetting editor will take care about this. So if you have parentheses, these are a bit too small, these are just right, these are maybe a bit too large here. And there's a nice picture explaining this. So this is if the parentheses are a bit too small, this is if the parentheses are a bit too large. Right? Both does not make too much sense. You want to have the parentheses in the right size, also in your formulas. Okay, so then we come to the very important point of writing units, and there is a document. I will maybe quickly click on this, which is the SI brochure of this Bureau International my French is not very good, of measures in units and stuff and quantities, and they publish this brochure. The last update was about 6-7 years ago. And this is some internationally agreed standard on how to write and how to use units. And everyone uses it, except maybe for some US American people, because they have their imperial units. But also in the real science, like at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, where I've also worked for a couple of weeks in Boulder, Colorado, they also take care about this a lot. And so, what does this say? It says units are always written in upright letters, in Roman type upright letters. And there's always a little space between the number and the unit. Let's say these are the two most important rules. A space between a number and a unit, a non-breaking space. It can be also a thin space, but there should be some space. The space indicates that there's a multiplication between the number and the unit. And the unit is written in an upright letter. This is super important. Okay, yeah, and then there are some, for typesetting and for formatting, some more rules when something is written upright. Here, the E we have already discussed, like Euler's number. The sign function is a function with a special meaning, so that's why this is also written upright. This index here is not a variable in itself. It's the abbreviation for the word maximum, so this is also written in upright letters, not slanted. So this is here always wrong. I should maybe have this in red. So it should be like this, not like this. It should be like this with an upright D for the differential operator, not like this. Okay, then as said, there should be a thin space. In a longer document, it's of course good to use a consistent format. So everywhere write like kilometer times hour to the power of -1 or kilometers per hour. Giving units in the square brackets is usually wrong. And I mean, this number format looks much nicer than this number format, even though they mean the same at the end. And I mean, the good thing is there is a, as for everything in LaTeX, there's a package. It's called SI-UNIT-X package. And you give this into this package, and then it will typeset it like this. And so usually you don't need to care about this if you use the proper LaTeX template, if you use the proper LaTeX packages. So why is this important? Once again, if you don't stick to these rules, you don't know, is the small m, is the lowercase m, is it the mass or is it the meter? If it's slanted, then it would be the mass. If it's upright, like here, then it's the meter. So this m stands for meter because we know, okay, upright should be a unit. Okay, so then I have another survey, another poll. So I will try to locate the page here in my browser. Which word processing software are you using? I can show the QR code once again. And then if everyone has scanned the QR code, then I will start the question. And then you should wiederholen. Can I also just do it 30 seconds? Yeah, okay. 30 seconds should be enough to answer this question. So the question is, which word processing software are you currently using for writing laboratory protocols? And it should be a multiple choice survey, so you can also check more than these answers. Interestingly, does it work? It works, okay, because I'm confused that it still says, okay, now it says 12 people. Okay, so once again, the blue result is your group, the light blue result is previous groups. Okay, so the LaTeX has increased. That's good, that's great. And people use something different, which is also okay. I think now the hot stuff is typed or typed. But I'm so stuck to LaTeX that I will stick to LaTeX for the rest of my life, maybe. But if I would start from scratch, then I would maybe have a look at this types. I can, so to the 50 people that still say Microsoft Word, maybe we can, over the time, nudge you to use something better, something more useful. This would be really great. Okay. Yeah, and the other stuff is, maybe not so important. So I have lots of these, I have much more of this, what can go wrong if you use Word, and the tabs versus spaces and stuff and so on. And I mean, just to give an overview, there is this, what you see is what you get software. You type it and then you see it more or less in a way as it's printed, like in Word and LibreOffice. Then there is LaTeX, which is more or less a programming language. On Windows, you would use MikTeX. On Mac, you would use TeX Live. And then there is something in between what you see is what you mean. And there has been a scientific word in the LaTeX editor that is now maybe not that popular anymore. And in Overleaf, I think there's also now I think a rich text editor or something, how it's called, where you also a little bit see directly, okay, this is a heading, this is a section, this is a subsection. That does something like this, that you don't just see the source code and somehow need to parse it in your head. But okay. Yeah. As always, gives me the time to drink something. So this is a very good joke. Then this is another good, maybe joke, maybe not. XKCD is a very good website with engineering humor. I show pictures from this website a lot in presentations. It's a very good person, Randall Munro, and he has here a chart of the trustworthiness of information by file extension, and of course the TeX is right at the top. The doc is somewhere in the middle, and the JPEG and the GIF or GIF is somewhere at the bottom. Okay, so yeah, back to the topic. If you want to create good figures, don't use Microsoft Paint. Try to use some real software. And just to give some idea, there is this dia where you can see, where you can create from basic geometric figures, you can create more complicated schematics, and it's in a vector format. There's this IPE software that would also allow you to insert LaTeX formulas and labels and stuff directly in there. Then generally good formula to manipulate and edit vector graphics is this Inkscape, which is also open source and freeware. For photos, there are many software out there. I can recommend this XNView. So if you want to crop a figure, if you want to change the brightness, if you want to adjust the contrast whatsoever, if you want to change the resolution. Of course, nowadays, every smartphone can also do this, right? If you take a picture, if you want to crop it, if you want to change, adjust something, it's very easy to do nowadays also just on a smartphone. And then more hints for LaTeX users. So that's why they are on bold. We will take a look at these two figures for diagrams and circuit schematics. This is what I've already mentioned for the units. There are some packages to also have links in your document that you can click, as we have seen. The AMS is the American Mathematical Society. They have a package for typesetting formulas, which is very powerful, and so on. So there are lots of packages for each and every purpose. So there's almost nothing that you cannot do, and maybe a big challenge is to always find the proper package. And in this, and so there has been, or there still is a huge database of all these LaTeX packages, and I would guess nowadays also AI tools can help a little bit in finding proper packages because they have read all the menus, let's say. If you ask them a specific question, you might not get the right answer, but they might at least pinpoint you to the correct package that might be useful for this and this purpose. Okay, and I'm using, but this is maybe the very old-fashioned way, on my Windows computer, Technik Center in Sumatra PDF as a PDF viewer. I think if you do something now, you can just use Overleaf and will be very satisfied with it, except for maybe if you have very long, very complicated documents. Let's say if you typeset a whole book, then it would probably still make sense to do it locally on your computer, yeah? Or to go to some more advanced system like Types that is faster for longer documents. But once again, moving a figure in Word can give you some real pain, because it can screw up your whole document. Who has experienced this? There are many arms going up. Okay. So then we can take a look, or we can take a look at some good and bad examples. As I've said at the beginning, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the first examples are a little bit related to the style. So now I've changed this a little bit. So now we are looking at the style first, and then we are looking at the content. As you can see, this is a German protocol here. So don't care about the content. Think about the style. If you look at this, what would you say? What is maybe bad? What can be improved?
Well, the headlines are not really distinguishable.
Yeah. So we have something like the main title here, and then we have like a section, and then we have maybe like a subsection or a paragraph, and then we have the next paragraph here, and we have the next paragraph there, and so on. Yeah? And then we have the next section here. And each and every text in this document uses the very same font and the very same font size and the very same font style, which does not make too much sense. So if we would just reformulate it like this, the very same content, just in a different style, then it looks much better. Yeah, it's much more structured. You can much easier get an overview and see, okay, yeah, we have some fundamentals, and then we have different bridge circuits and so on. Okay, so the second example is very nice because it shows that even in LaTeX you can do something wrong, because the people often working with LaTeX, they would recognize that this is the computer modern, this is the standard LaTeX font that is used there for written documents. And Inhaltsverzeichnis in German means table of contents. This, what we see, should be a table of contents. So what has gone wrong here? Or what could be improved?
Backside is small and large.
Yeah, there is some, I mean, there's different font style for different, this is a section, this is a subsection, here we even have sub-subsections.
The difference between the sections, subsections, and sub-subsections is not really easy to see.
Yeah, it's the thing is, the interesting thing is that people obviously have created this table of contents manually. And one idea and one big advantage of LaTeX is that usually you don't need to care about this. Yeah, you say LaTeX, this is a section, or this is a chapter, this is a section, this is a subsection, and then of course LaTeX knows, okay, there are so many chapters, each chapter has this in a subsection, and you just give one command, and the command is table of contents, and then it will automatically typeset a table of contents of your document. And if you add a section, it will automatically add it to the table of contents. If you delete a section, it will automatically delete it from the table of contents. So there is no need at all to do this by hand. Yeah, and if you do it just with the command, then it looks much better, because Still German, of course, saying table of contents, but then we see, okay, these are the 3 sections, and there are 2 subsections and 2 subsections, and here the first subsection has 3 subsections and so on. Yeah, and okay, maybe what I've changed here also is that, of course, in the table of contents, it does not make too much sense to say, okay, subsection 311 is experiment 311. What should this be? So I've added some more information here, what this experiment means, what the next experiment means, what the next experiment means, and so on. Yeah, so there's, let's say, something related to style, and here there's also something related to the content. This is a very nice example as well. What went wrong here? Yeah, the axis labels have been added subsequently, and that's why they are out of the figure itself. Okay, more comments? Yeah, the gray background does not make too much sense. From which software is this probably? From MATLAB, right? Because if you plot something in MATLAB, it always gets this gray background. So the person here has very probably just taken a screenshot of the MATLAB window and then used this as a figure. The people sitting in the second to last row, can you read the numbers? Here, this? It's okay, right? It's okay. The projector is not too bad in the room. Yeah, but I mean, if I zoom in, and you can see this is what I mean. This is a raster graphic, and it's also compressed in this JPEG compression. And so raster graphic means the graphic consists of these single pixels, and for each pixel, the color or the grayscale value is stored. And now this JPEG compression is a lossy compression that has been developed to compress photographs that you do with your cell phone. And what the JPEG compression actually does is the formula that we have seen before. It does a Fourier transform of the picture. It takes the picture as a 2-dimensional function and then does a 2-dimensional Fourier transform of the picture. So it gets a 2-dimensional spectrum of the picture. And then it throws away the high frequency information in the spectrum because this is in the actual compression that you do, more or less in a simplified way. And that's why always where you have a contrast, let's say from gray to black to white, yeah, or here from white to black to white, where you have rapid changes, let's say in the time domain of your signal, you would also need to have the high frequencies in the spectrum to capture this change, but the high frequency information has been thrown away, and that's why you get these compression artifacts here. Yeah, and that's why it looks this noisy and this fuzzy and this, I don't know, jiggly. Yeah, and if you take a photograph with your cell phone, usually you don't have this rapid contrast. You more or less have smooth changes from one color into another color, except for, I don't know, and you don't have white, black, white, black, white, black, yeah, from one pixel to the next pixel, except for maybe you take a picture of a zebra or something like this. Of course, you have high contrast. And so for the smartphone, it's totally okay to use this JPEG compression. Here it's not okay. If you need to have raster graphics for some reason, for example, you have a screenshot from an oscilloscope, yeah, and then it's a screenshot, it's a pixel, it's a raster graphic, then save it in this PNG format, in the portable networks graphic. This is also a compressed format, but it's lossless. And it won't show these compression artifacts. Okay, so if we want to improve this example, I've recreated this figure in LaTeX, and now of course it looks much nicer. Yeah? So we have labels directly here and there. We also have what this means. This is the frequency, this is the quality factor, and now this is a vector graphic. If I zoom in, and now you can see that, oops, I can arbitrarily zoom in, it will always look nice, because this vector graphic consists of basic geometric elements, lines, letters, circles, rectangles, something like this. And that's why you can arbitrarily scale it without loss of quality. And this is at the end what you want to have. And so if I review a paper, if people send me papers, and if I find in these papers raster graphics, I directly send them back and tell the people, please improve the quality of your figures, especially if you have created them yourself, because then you're responsible for the quality of your figures. And don't try to present me your great research if you have not understood. What have you understood about your research if you have not understood the difference between a raster graphic and a vector graphic? From my point of view, this is important, right? It's good. It's the using the proper tools for your research and for presenting your research. Okay, this is also a very nice example. Say again? Yeah, I think this, so it's a circuit schematic. I think this happened by using paint or screenshots, and then they have been scaled and rescaled lots of times. And because we can see, I mean, this arrow here is much, or this element is much sharper than the other ones. So I think the person, whoever created this, has drawn something. I mean, each resistor also looks slightly different. These numbers are way too small, right? It's even easier to guess that this could be a 430 if it's not that enlarged. Yeah, but this is of course a very horrible figure. Because it's a raster graphic, it's the totally wrong way to create such a figure. Once again, if we use LaTeX, if we recreate this figure, this will be the second example, then we get a nice figure that is very clear with proper numbers and stuff. And once again, if I zoom in somewhere here, then you see this is now a vector graphic like you would like to have it, that arbitrarily scales without loss of information and without loss of quality. Okay, then we can have a look at some more examples that have something to do with the content. So what is maybe good, bad, or what not about the content in this list of figures that we see here? Any idea?
Proper labeling.
Say again?
More proper labeling.
Yeah, I mean, this is, if you have a figure caption and the figure caption starts with, this is a figure showing something, yeah, for sure it's a figure. I mean, it's a figure, and the figure will always show something. And so this is very obvious, not meaningful, totally redundant information. So I would change it and say, okay, this is the experimental results for this at this and this frequency, and then even this contains some redundancy, so it probably would even make more sense to have one figure that says, okay, experimental results for the resonance curve, and then I have a sub-figure A for this frequency, a sub-figure B for this frequency, a sub-figure C for this frequency. And so this also shows a little bit that the person, whoever has written this, did not think too much about what he or she has done there. Okay, so this is also a very nice example. this is a screenshot from some oscilloscope, and the caption says it's the oscillogram to measure the periodic time of this triangular pulse train function that we have here. So we have we have this triangular periodic function, and that is generated by some signal generator, and we take an oscilloscope to measure the periodic time. So now the question is, the question to all of you guys is, what is the periodic time? And the 4 people watching online, you can also write something into the chat. What is the periodic time? I don't have any prizes with me today, unfortunately, so I cannot give something to the person who first says the correct answer, what is the periodic time of this time function. Say again? Yeah, there are time intervals. I mean, the oscilloscope display always has these 10 time divisions, and also usually 8 amplitude divisions. Yeah, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 time divisions, and one time division is 200 microseconds long. And the periodic time of this function, right? Let's say it starts somewhere here, and then we have one period, and so from here to here it's about 2.5 of these time divisions. If one time division is 200 microseconds, then the periodic time should be 500 microseconds. And it is 500 microseconds, so no one has written it in the chat. The periodic time is 500 microseconds. The problem is, it's not at all obvious to see it from the schematic. And the schematic or the screenshot is hiding the information that it should give. I mean, you can see here that there are 2 markers, A and B, and there's lots of frequencies and voltages. There are lots of numbers displayed here, but nowhere we can find the 500 microseconds. This was the question that was asked here. What is the periodic time? Measure the periodic time using markers. Yeah, so for the 500 microseconds, 0.5 milliseconds, here the frequency that this is here 1.999 or 992 kilohertz. This would be the corresponding frequency to a periodic time of 500 microseconds. So the answer is also hidden somewhere here in the delta F. 2 kilohertz corresponds to 500 microseconds. And so this is a nice example for, okay, there's a figure. The figure is also a technical figure. The figure is also an illustrative figure. The figure is factually correct, but it's not answering the question. It's not telling a story. It's hiding the information that you would essentially like to show. And this will be always super confusing for your readers. I mean, for the protocol in the lab, I would guess no one will really care. In your thesis, people will ask you questions. Yeah, if you write a paper, it won't be cited that much, I would guess. Yeah, because it's just not very understandable. Okay, so there are some more options here to improve. Hide the menu, try to hide all other unnecessary stuff, save it as a PNG and have it in a reasonable size. Yeah, but I mean here, this is more or less okay. So then this is also a good example. So I will enlarge this a bit more, and then we can a bit discuss this. So this is an example of a student, and I will give you some time to read it, and then you can maybe give some suggestions for improvement. Yeah, so in English documents, it's quite common that if you start a new paragraph, it always gets this indent. Maybe not the first one. In European documents, it's more common to have half an empty line to show that the new paragraph starts. Okay, yeah, so okay, we have some text and we have these formulas. Yeah, the formula is not numbered. The second formula is numbered, but the number of the formula sticks to the formula, should be somewhere on the right side. Yeah. And then we have units inside the equation, which does not make too much sense. The units are not in upright Roman type letters. And then here it is, yeah, omega is the angular frequency. Here we have, let's say, a dash, but without any space. Here we have a dash with a space. Here we have a hyphen. Here we have another dash. And so it's very arbitrary style. Does not look too nice. And I think this can happen especially if you use Word and if you don't take too much care. So this is the very same example, just written in LaTeX, and just this here reformulated as text. So I've deleted the units. There's a proper numbering here and there, and it now says, okay, omega is the angular frequency, U is the energy stored, and PD is the average dissipated power, and so on. And because this D is not a variable, it's the abbreviation for dissipated, this is once again printed in an upright letter, not in a slanted letter. Okay, and the other option would be to say, instead of writing this as a text, is to say, okay, where omega is the angular frequency, U is the energy stored, PD is the average dissipated power. This consumes a bit more space, but also gives a nice overview of the quantities and variables and so on used in some equation. And yeah, it's much better harmonized style than the one that we have seen before. Is there a question? No, okay. Once again, it's much easier to do it correct in LaTeX. It's much easier to do it wrong in Word. And so, yeah, this is now a question, let's say for the 50% here that have voted that they still use Word. The next question is, do you still have the page open on your browser, in your cell phone? Do you need the QR code once again? So then I will directly start the question, and maybe I can then still show the QR code. The question is, why are you not using LaTeX already? Because you were not aware of it, or because it's too complicated, too much like programming, or it's too time consuming and the learning curve is too shallow, or you say, you know, LaTeX is nice, but it's only used in academia, not in the industry. And if I go later as an engineer into the industry, I need to use Word anyhow, or a different system, or I don't see that big advantages over Word or OpenOffice or LibreOffice. And there's 10 seconds left to cast your vote. And okay, many people say, I was not aware of it. I think it does not scale here. Yeah, some people say, okay, too complicated, too time consuming, only used in academia. So, okay, to discuss this a little bit, the start can be really hard, for sure. It depends on if you have a good template, I would guess. If you have a good template, you just insert your text your content, and because content is separated from style, you don't need to care about the style. It will always look good. Time consuming, yes, maybe, especially if you want to make it perfect at the end, but still I would say that in Word or in LaTeX you don't have more or less problems or errors. You have different problems. Still, I would say that in LaTeX you get a better result at the end. That it's only used in academia, not in the industry, is of course something that could be changed. Because, yeah, for using Microsoft Word, at least you need to have a license. Now, Microsoft and OpenAI, they are pushing all these stupid AI features into their software that, at least in companies, I would guess, gives people many headaches related to data privacy and security issues. And I mean, LaTeX is for free. It's an open source software. You can also change it in your own way. You can run it really onto your own computer without any cloud at all, and so on. So maybe this is something. Yeah. And so now the Microsoft, in their terms of use for the Copilot AI, they even admit that it's for entertainment purposes only. Please don't use the Copilot for doing any real work. Okay, and yeah, maybe you have not seen the advantages. Okay, but thanks anyhow for this. So we can come to some tips, some hints, some examples, and these are related to a set, to a diagram with this PGF plots, to what we have seen in the examples, and to a circuit schematic. And I mean, just to give you an idea, I think the next workshop, next week, will be some introduction into LaTeX. I don't know why we always stick to the schedule like this, but next week I might also be on business travel. That's why it's okay that we have it, that I'm here today. So this is how LaTeX source code looks like. And the begin and end are always environments, and there's an environment that is called TikZ Picture that has been developed by a German person, and he was also a nerd. And so this TikZ is some stupid abbreviation for TikZ is kein Zeichenprogramm. TikZ is not a drawing program, because it's not a drawing program, it's a drawing language. You program everything with commands, and inside this environment that can generate more or less arbitrary figures, there's something that creates plots. So there's a begin axis and an end axis, and this will do a linearly scaled plot. And then we have a command that adds a line to this plot with this formula, with this function, sinusoidal function, in this domain from 0 to 20 with 101 samples. Does anyone know what is the physical meaning of this sine function that we have here? So there is a square root times 230 for the amplitude. This is our, I cannot lift it up now, yeah, but this would be our mains grid. I can lift it up, yeah, this would be our mains grid voltage. And 20 milliseconds is the periodic time because we have 50 Hertz. Yeah, so, but at the end, this should plot us one sine curve. And this is how it looks like. So this source code will create this figure. Nice. It automatically adds some numbers to the curve, to the axis, and because it separates content and style, this is just content. We have a sine curve. The style, that the numbers have a certain format, or the font has a certain format, that the first line is blue. This is written somewhere else in the settings. Okay, so what would we need to add to make it into a good figure? we need to have labels, right? We need to say on the axis we have this and this. So let's add some labels. So there are commands to add an X label and a Y label, and this should be the time as the variable t in milliseconds and the voltage U of t in the unit volt. And then we get labels at the axis. Okay, next step, maybe we want to have that the curve really starts at 0, that we don't have this white space here and there, so that we limit the axis a little bit, and maybe we want to make this figure a bit larger, yeah, so that it better fits the screen or fits my slides. So what I can do is, at first, I'm limiting the axis here a little bit. I say the x-axis should start at 0 and end at 20, and the y-axis should go from minus 350 to plus 350. And then it looks like this, right? Now the white space here and there is gone. Okay, next step is maybe we can adjust the size. So we can say, okay, the width of this figure should be 80% of the text width. The height should be 35% of the text width. Yeah, in order, the source code is getting a bit more complicated, a bit longer, but still everything is quite understandable. And now the figure got wider and maybe got a bit higher. And the interesting thing is that if you compare it with the narrow figure, now we change the size of the figure, that also automatically there's more space. So LaTeX automatically added more labels, added more numbers, because now we have more space, so we can have more numbers there. And so this would not really work if you create the figure, let's say in MATLAB. You can create the figure in MATLAB, but if you then save it and then later rescale it in your document, everything grows larger, everything grows smaller. There would be no numbers added or numbers omitted. And so this is clearly some advantage of adding or creating the figures directly in LaTeX. And of course, now we can have a second curve here, add a cosine curve, and then also add a legend that says, okay, the first function that we have is a sine curve, the second function that we have is a cosine waveform. And so then automatically the second curve would be whatever is given there in the settings would be green and dashed, and then we get a legend. And so now the nice thing is, yeah, I don't have this example here, but now if you have written your thesis and you have, I don't know, 30 plots, they are all color, and now your professor says, you know, you have written a very nice thesis, and I want to print it as a book and send it to all my research colleagues because they should know about your great thesis, but we don't have that much money to print your book in color. We need to print it black and white. And so now usually you would need to go to your MATLAB or Python or Octave or whatever, wherever you have created your 30 figures, and would need to change the style from color to grayscale, and so on, resave them, reinsert them in your document. In LaTeX, because you separate content from style, you change one line in the settings that you don't want to have colored lines anymore, you want to have grayscale lines, and then all the 30 documents or all the 30 plots in your document will change, like magic, will change from color to black and white. Yeah, or if you change the font type, you change the font size, you take plots from your paper or from your report, put them into a presentation, then they will automatically change to the corresponding font, they will adjust to the proper size and so on. So yeah, the starting point maybe takes some more effort, but later on you can save lots of effort by changing your document. The same as if you want to translate stuff. If you want to translate it for our students very often from German into English for another publication, Yeah, so usually you would need to go back to MATLAB or wherever you created your figures, do the translation there. Here you can just go back to your source code and translate whatever is written here. No problem, right? Okay, and so you can not only get data from formulas, but you can also directly specify data points in the source code. Of course, you can also load text files with data that you want to plot. And you can not only do these line plots in linear and logarithmic and semi-logarithmic scale, you could also do bar plots and comp plots and different coordinate systems, polar coordinates, ternary axis for high frequency, radio frequency, electric engineering. You can plot Smith charts and everything that you can do in MATLAB, in Matplotlib, in Python, you can also do here, I would say. So this, once again, gives people the feeling of power, right? LaTeX can do formulas and stuff, and oh, I moved an image and ruined everything. Okay, so now we can come to the second example, circuit schematics with CircuiTikZ. And for this, I will, I think, try to do a screenshot of my figure, of my window, and then use my journal editor here. Windows Journal, is this the right app? Yeah. And insert the figure there. And then I can have my drawing tablet and draw a little bit on top of this figure as soon as my drawing tablet is connected via Bluetooth to my computer, which is now the case. And so let's, I don't know, start with black. So to understand what happens here, you need to think a little bit about a coordinate system. So we have a coordinate system with a y-axis and an x-axis. And let's say here is the point with the coordinates 0 and 0. 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis. And so now we draw something, we draw an eye, which is the current source to the point 0 and 4. 0 on the x-axis, 4 on the y-axis. So this is the point with the coordinates 0 and 4. And so this element, let me take a different color here. This eye then will be this element. That we get a current source from this to this. So then we have the next point. The next point is at the coordinates 4 and 4. So this would be somewhere here. 4 on the x and 4 on the y-axis. And from this point to the next point, we draw a short circuit connection. So this here is the short circuit. Maybe I should just underline this. So this was the blue current source. This is the green short circuit connection, just a short circuit connection from here to here. So then we have the next point, which is this one here at 4 on the x-axis and 2 on the y-axis. And from this point to this point, we have a variable resistor. So I will use red for the variable resistor. So from here to here, we get a variable resistor that looks like this. And then we have the next element. Oops, I want to have a different color. I want to have gray. Yeah, so a plain resistor going from here to here. I've not labeled this point yet, but this is 4 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis. And then we have a last short connection where I will use this light green to go back to the point where we started. And so this source code will create this simple circuit schematic. That's the idea. This is how it works. And so this is also then what comes out here in the LaTeX example, right? And then we can do a bit more stuff. We can add these inner branches as it's written here. So they would create the other 3 elements, right? Another variable resistor, another resistor to the bottom, and then resistor from the center to the right. So we have these 3 elements. Then what is missing? We maybe need these soldering dots, and we need to have labels. Okay, so at first I think we add labels. We say, okay, this is this and this resistor, this has this and this many ohms. So then, unfortunately something bad happens. The labels are too long. The circuit is too small. So what could be a solution for this? Make the circuit grow bigger. A naive and stupid solution would be, of course, to change these numbers, right? If we change, I don't know, this 4 into a 6, then we would scale everything in the x direction, but we don't really want to change these numbers. We just want to rescale the figure. So we say, okay, in the x direction, the figure must be a bit larger. In the y direction, it must be maybe also a bit larger. Yeah, but the numbers stay the same. The only thing that I've changed is this. And so, okay, now the figure grows bigger. We have space for all the labels. The last thing is that we do we add these soldering dots here. So this creates a soldering dot, this creates a soldering dot. So this is the one at the top, this is the one at the bottom, and these are the 2 ones for the bridge resistor, right? And I think I've also added currents now, so that we have a label for the currents inside the circuit. And yeah, so there are much more elements, bipoles, tripoles like transistors, transformers as double bipoles, monopoles like an antenna. And you can also separate content from style, because there's the European style for the resistor, there's the American style for the resistor. And for example, you guys know it very well, because from the electrical engineering lecture, there is the exercise book for the German students, and there's the exercise book for the international students, and it's the very same schematics, but the one book uses the European symbols, the other book uses the American symbols. And I've really changed just one line in the settings somewhere, and then all the circuit schematics and all the exercise tasks would, by miracle or like a miracle, change from the one style to the other style, which is of course very nice. Yeah? And now you might say, okay, but this is super complicated, I need to think about here the coordinate system and stuff. And you are absolutely right, and that's why nice people from the FAU, which is the Friedrich Alexander University in, I think, Erlangen, Nürnberg. Christoph van Müller is his name. Cannot be praised enough. He has, with some other colleagues, he has written a graphical user interface for this. So if you go to this website, which should open up in my browser, then you get the CircuiTikZ Designer, and you can then draw something here and export what you have drawn as a source code. And as far as I know, as said, the person who did this, Christoph van Müller, is now working at OVGU. So he's now here at our university. So you can meet him, and if you have used this, and if you find it useful, meet him and spend him a coffee or something like this, right? To acknowledge the creation of this nice piece of software. Okay, so then I have a last question for the other colleagues that do the other LaTeX workshops. So wait, I need to go back to my survey and find this question, which is this one here. And then I will just restart it and show the QR code. And yeah, so the question is, you see the question on your screen, right? So what LaTeX related topics would you like to see in further IEEE workshops and presentations? Typesetting formulas, typesetting tables, citing sources, listing references, drawing more schematics, like, for example, the one of a measurement setup, creating presentation slides. So the slides that I've used for my presentation are, of course, also created in LaTeX. Or the last question that is not really shown here is, don't bother me with LaTeX anymore. And so there should be the result. So there's each and everything, but the drawing schematics is the most voted. Okay, so I will pass this on to the colleagues. Once again, yeah, I've not said this enough already. So in summary, the advisor of your lab, your thesis, whatever, should see that you tried hard and took care. Yeah? And our German students, to be honest, and I also in my study hated it to write all these protocols, but the time that you invest there, the time that you learn on how to write such of these documents is time that you save at the end when writing your thesis. Yeah, so this is well invested time, let's say, at the beginning of your study. And that's why the learning curve, yeah, the pain that you have at the beginning in LaTeX is for sure higher than the pain in Word, but there's a page limit somewhere, and then the pain in Word exponentially grows, and the pain in LaTeX more or less stays constant. Yeah? And so maybe you have not hit this point yet, but yeah, I can say that this is, yeah, and this is a nice. I need to find this. Wait, I need to find this this figure from my. Where's my computer here? I need